This is day 3 for EWC playoffs, and overall, these games have been really competitive, which is exciting to see because we've seen Masters Toronto's, Masters Santiago, where teams are doing a lot of 2-0s, and a lot of the teams that are down a map don't come back. And that has not been the case for this tournament. Every game in this playoffs has been 3 maps at the very least, which makes things very competitive and makes for a lot of exciting plays, which is a really good sign for how things are shaping for how stage 2 and champs are going to play out. And so for this series and the next series, it's the final four. Winners go to grand finals, losers go to a consolation third place match. And for the first series, it's 100 Thieves versus Nongshim. And Nongshim, it was pretty interesting. For their sunset, they threw a double innie comp, which is pretty surprising compared to how much success they've had with the Phoenix comp, or the Phoenix Neon comp with the Dombey and Francis. But Francis chooses, or the team chooses to put Francis on the breach role. In this case, it wasn't that successful just because 100 Thieves were able to mitigate and realize what the plan is. It's kind of like a fracture. Usually breaches on fracture, they're there to set up trap plays and at the very least, create stall plays, or, create stalls with the stun, because that's pretty much the most of the utility. Players are able to dodge flashes, and even aftershocks rarely get kills. So the stun is the main course of the utility on Sunset. There was a lot of brawls, but there was also pretty much 100 Thieves understanding that it's very limited in how they can, or Nongshim can play. And them taking advantage of it, especially with the Neon and Phoenix countering it, it's being able to run past the stun lines and also being able to play off of the Neon wall and the Phoenix wall. Just because, if Dombey picks up the op, you're able to flash out the common sight lines that most players play, and even if they're holding an angle, even if they're holding an Odin, in most scenarios, or the whole idea of this comp is to get them off the sideline, so you're able to take space and be able to go into your post plant, or be able to deny plant and be in post plant, all that. And so for the most part, 100 Thieves understand it. They did a really good job. And then when it came to Lotus, it just seemed like when it came to Nongshim, they had a really slow start in the beginning. 100 Thieves put on a couple rounds. It was pretty much 5-1 at one point, and it seemed like 100 Thieves were about to go into the next level and make it a 2-0. But then pretty much Nongshim started going on a run. And I think within this comp, yes, it's not Francis being able to, sometimes before they would play the breach like a long time ago along with the Neon, but now they're doing the double duelist, and in this case it works, which is crazy enough to say. Why don't we just add that to Sunset? We can literally just play the Neon Phoenix in that scenario. And if I look at my notes, one thing I wanted to say was that there was a lot of momentum shifts, especially in the first half. It seemed like 100 Thieves had it in the first half of the first half, and then the second half, as we go into the later rounds, as Nongshim are attacking, then they start to pile on. And then as it goes to the second half where Nongshim are defending, then it was pretty much a steamroll from there on out. And then once you get a Haven, that's where it got really interesting. For the most part, I felt like Nongshim was pretty much in control. In the first half, they're constantly throwing, chaos into their attacking rounds. And then when it came to the defense round, it took an anti-eco ninja diffuse, which was pretty, crazy to see, and, which rarely happens in VCT at all. Overall, this map took an hour just because, it felt like Nongshim had control, but then it started to go in favor of 100 Thieves, and was the tail of the tape. X-Cross was probably, X-Cross and Ivy were probably the primary stars of the game. Like they had so much impact, but when it came to, Bang stepping up, the Bang has been highly criticized, along with sometimes even Cryo, where they're not stepping up in certain situations. And even in the situation where the double duelists, would shine in chaotic scenarios with Asuna and Timotino, they just never popped off. But luckily, with Bang, Cryo cells being really good anchors and also taking really good timings with the team, Haven was super chaotic, super competitive, and Nongshim seemed like the better team until 100 Thieves started to assert their will and end the second half. And there's some crazy shots that could have went 50-50, and this map could have ended either way. But I feel like 100 Thieves definitely deserve to be able to make the grand finals, the 13-11 in their series against Nongshim. One thing I want to highlight against Nongshim was I noticed that when it came to EWC, one thing I overlooked, I was very high on Longship. They had really good performances when it came to playing G2 twice, you know, maybe even losing to Gentlemates. But one thing I noticed is that no matter what, all their games went to map 3, which is kind of a little bit of a worrying sign, because one thing I start to expect for Nongshim, if they want to be a high quality team, even 100 Thieves it can be applicable towards, is you have to be able to know when to dominate a map 2-0. Even if teams are competitive, like, it shows the quality that you are. If you're able to play a G2 and get a 2-0, if you're able to play a Gentlemates and get a 2-0, like, that shows really good momentum and really good form for how this team shapes, you know, going into later forms. And 100 Thieves, if I check really quick, I want to check their schedule real quick. When it came to 100 Thieves, it was honestly a case of the same thing. Like, the only scenario in which they dominated a team was against RRQ, and given that RRQ hasn't really been the same, you know, since the first kickoff of the year, it's expected. So, but when it came to their later matches against BBL, MIBR, and even Longship, all of them went to 3 maps, which is great again for the viewer, but for as a fan of the team, and as you know, I'm pretty sure the coaches and players, there's certain maps or certain series where you want to be able to get out of the series in a 2-0 and not extend the third map. And it's also a tactical thing, just because, you know, the less maps you show, the more advantage you have when it comes to, you know, surprising a team, or even just, you know, less reps on a map or less footage shown on a map allows you to have that advantage. And then the next game, which is NRG and BBL. NRG was kind of showing lackluster signs, especially when it came to Haven. Like, Larock and oh my god, Loida, even Krevin, like, they showed so many impact rounds, whether it be clutches or, you know, just first kills. Like, being able to mitigate any momentum with NRG by getting a lot of first kills pretty much allowed them to progress and even dominate or assert their will going into the series. And so that was really good signs for BBL. But when it came to Breeze, it seemed pretty odd to say, because I feel like NRG was heavily favored in a map that was technically not their map pick, just because, you know, BBL ended up picking it. And I feel like no matter what they're showing, I feel like they have a really strong comp with their Viper, and Harbor, because, you know, Mata has a really good Harbor, and then you just have so much of adaptability compared to, you know, an Omen and a Viper, which BBL played. And so they didn't have a great start to begin with, but then later on, as they go into their defensive half, then that's where it really started to show, and they're able to edge out BBL in a series where they could have easily 2-0'd NRG. And as the series got on, it just showed that experience has so much more weight when it comes to tense pressure moments, just because it's a rematch with BBL and NRG. You know, BBL is talking a lot of trash. I'm sure NRG talks a lot of trash too. The whole thing is that, you know, BBL, it wants to be the villains, and they have no problem handling NA. But that still doesn't carry the weight, and still isn't the case, because NRG end up pulling it out of Lotus and assert their will on a map they're heavily favored on, which was pretty surprising compared, considering that it's, in my opinion, one of their best maps. Like, their Lotus and how they handle their comp, especially compared to BBL's comp, where they play Array's Neon and they only have Omen as the primary smokes. They simply just outclass them with their comp. Like, because even with Mata, he doesn't have to be a Neon, he doesn't have to be a Jet, but the ability to take space with the Rays, and then also having the adaptability of having double smokes, because, you know, you cover so much space and having so much stall. Like, you're pretty much a pseudo sentinel in being a Viper, and that's what Scuba is on Lotus. And then Kiko always showing up on Lotus. You know, he didn't have a crazy Lotus, but he was showing up with impact frags and allowing the team to be able to, you know, get the win at the end. And Mata was probably the most important. Like, in their previous game, NRG ended up playing a Jet